Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and we have a very busy night tonight for MLB DFS on July 10th, 2015. So we're going to get right into it. The idea of this bat section is to outline for you guys some of the pitchers that are on the mound, what their weaknesses are, and which guys on the opposing team profile best against them to be in good spots to have a good upside day. There's a lot of games on the slate tonight, and there's a lot of those pitchers that are right in the middle where they're not great against one-handedness, but they're also not really bad. So it's going to be a tough night with a lot of choices for us. So we're going to try to break it down and give you guys some options to look at. This way you have a short list that you can go through and try to pick out your favorites at each position. We're going to start with Danny Duffy going up against Toronto. Toronto's going to be very popular today. Anytime they go up against a left-handed pitcher, people always look to get as many of those bats in the lineup as they can. Their team batting average is over 300. They have the highest on-base plus slugging by over 100 basis points. So it's basically something that you really can't ignore. Now, the drawback today is this game is in Kansas City. Kauffman Stadium is not the easiest place to hit a home run in, although it does yield a decent amount of hits and runs. I definitely do think that Toronto is in a good spot, but I don't know if they're going to have the huge upside that everybody expects them to. And if you're thinking that they're contrarian, they're definitely not going to be. This is a stack that a lot of people are talking about, and you're going to see a lot of people with a lot of these Toronto bats in their lineup. Duffy's a guy who allows a 289 batting average to right-handed bats with 6 home runs in 43 innings pitched so far this year. Now, some of the guys you might want to look at against him, Josh Donaldson is obviously the number one option. He's expensive everywhere on every site, but he has a 356 batting average with 6 home runs and 73 at-bats against left-handed pitching so far this year. So this is the exact matchup that you want. Donaldson's been a guy who's hit lefties well his whole career. Like I said, he's expensive. If you want to pay up for him, you can, but he's definitely somebody who's going to be in play today. And if you don't pay up for him and he has that 2 home run game, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. Next guy to look at is Chris Colabello. He has a 360 batting average against lefties this year with 4 home runs and 50 at-bats. So he's still cheap in spots. And where he's still cheap, I definitely think he's somebody you got to look at today. I mean, I don't know where it came from. He didn't show these numbers in Minnesota, but right now he's absolutely smashing left-handed pitching. So you don't want to argue or fight the numbers. It's what it's pointing out to you, and he's definitely a guy that you should take a look at. There's other guys on that Toronto team that are in play too. Joey Bautista, Edwin Encarnacion, Danny Valencia, if you're looking for a cheaper option at third base than going with Donaldson. Russ Martin, I guess you can put in there. I don't really love him against left-handed pitching, though. It's not like he's amazing. He's been okay this year, but it's not something that he's shown throughout his entire career. If they were playing in Toronto, maybe he would be in play for me, but Russ Martin is somebody who I wouldn't use today from Toronto. Next guy I want to talk about is Justin Verlander. He's another guy I think you can target against today. He's made 4 starts, and he has 18.3 fantasy points. Not an average of 18.3 fantasy points, but a total of 18.3 fantasy points in his 4 starts on DraftKings. So he has been absolutely horrible lately. 22 innings pitched, 17 runs allowed, 26 hits allowed, and 10 walks so far in those 4 starts. So basically, you can pretty much look at anybody on Minnesota. The problem is Minnesota doesn't hit right-handed pitching all that well. That's actually one of the things that we've been targeting this year is good right-handers going up against that Minnesota team. So I'm not sure which way this one's going to go. I really don't think Verlander's right. He's not the guy from a couple years ago that was a Cy Young Award winner. He's definitely somebody who's been getting knocked around, but I'm not really sure which bats make the most sense on Minnesota. The 2 guys who hit right-handed pitching best are Joe Mauer, who has about a 275 average against them, and Eddie Rosario, who has a 270 average. So those are the 2 lefties that you might want to target. Neither one of them has great numbers, though. Usually when you have a guy that you want to target, he's hitting over 310, over 320 against that handedness of pitcher. He's shown some power, a home run every 10 at-bats or 12 at-bats or so. Neither Mauer nor Rosario really fit into that description, but they are the 2 best bats that you can target against them. Verlander's also been giving up a lot of home runs, and he's been doing it to right-handed bats as well. So you can look at guys like Torrey Hunter and Brian Dozier. I think there will be some people who are stacking Minnesota tonight against Verlander. He has been that bad. But I don't know. I just don't see a lot of guys that stand out as guys that I think you should be using in cash games. There isn't a lot of guys that make sense as safe plays tonight, but there is a lot of upside for him in tournaments. Let's see. The next guy I want to talk about is Kendall Graveman on the list. He's been pretty solid. He has about a 260 batting average to both sides of the plate. He hasn't been bad at all. His numbers are pretty good. He goes up against that Cleveland Indians team. There's two guys from Cleveland that stand out. One because his numbers are amazing, and the other one because his price is too cheap for a guy that's hitting cleanup. So the two guys who I think you can look at are Jason Kipnis, who's hitting 371 against right-handed pitching so far this year. I mean, that average is way too high to ignore. He's a guy who's going to pick up a couple hits for you. He's definitely in a good spot today. Kipnis is somebody you can roll out. The problem is he's very expensive. I think he's either the top priced or the second most expensive option. Oh. Hey, sorry about that, guys. A little bit of computer trouble. So basically I was saying Kipnis is either the top priced or the second most expensive option, but he does have a 371 batting average against right-handed pitching. So he's definitely somebody who's in play. The other guy who you can look at is David Murphy. Murphy's got a 321 batting average with 5 home runs and 160 at-bats against right-handed pitching. And when they play against a right-hander, he's the guy who finds himself batting in the cleanup spot. So if you can get a guy like Murphy hitting in the cleanup spot, hitting 321 with a little bit of power, and his price is still pretty cheap all over. So if you can get him in that spot, I definitely think he's another guy you can look at. But I do like Graveman a little bit on the mound today, so I wouldn't be looking to target these guys heavy. Next guy we can talk about is Marco Estrada. Estrada's been really good lately. He is a guy who has given up a lot of home runs in his career, but so far this year, he's been really, really good. I mean, he's given up about a 210 batting average to both sides of the plate. Nobody's really hitting him well. Nobody's really hitting him hard. I'm not really expecting him to have any regression. The one problem that he always has had is giving up home runs. And in Kauffman Stadium's not a place that allows a lot of home runs anyway. So if he can keep those balls in the ballpark and keep pitching the way he has, I can't really see using any of these Royals today. If I was going to attack him with anybody, I would look at a guy like Alex Gordon, where he's still cheap. He's hitting second in that order with Moustakas being out. So he's somebody who you can look at. The other left-handed bat is Eric Hosmer, but Hosmer coming back from the injury hasn't really looked the same. He had a great start to the season and has kind of just been okay lately. And again, Estrada's been pretty good. So those are the two guys that you might want to target against them, but I wouldn't even go heavy. Like I said, if you guys notice, I hit on some of the teams that are going to be the big stacks early on. But for the rest of the analysis here, there's only one or two guys that really stand out on each one of these teams. It's going to be a tough day. It seems more like a cash game day where you want to pick a couple guys in the good spots and put them in your lineup because there really aren't a lot of these teams that are screaming, stack this team up against them. The next guy that we'll talk about is David Hale going up against Atlanta. Now, I don't like the Atlanta stack, even though they're in Coors Field. I know a lot of people used it yesterday, and it really didn't pay off for anybody. I mean, a bad team is a bad team, whether they're in Coors Field or not. And right now, Atlanta is just a pretty bad team. The thing is, David Hale's also a pretty bad pitcher. So, it's going to be, there could be a tipping point here where, maybe Hale is just that bad that Atlanta does put up some runs. I don't really know, but it's not a game that I'm going to be targeting too heavily. Hale has allowed a 289 batting average to left-handed bats last year. This year, he's allowed a 302 batting average to left-handed bats with 7 home runs. So I guess, you could look at a guy like Markakis, but remember, he has no home run power, so he doesn't really fit. The hottest hitter on Atlanta has been Cameron Maybin, so you can look at Maybin and put him in your lineups. The problem I have is his price has gotten jacked up because they're playing in Coors Field. And again, it's a righty-righty matchup, so it's not really the perfect splits advantage for him. Jose Uribe, the same way. All three of these guys are hitting over 300 against right-handed pitching this year, but it's still not exactly the spot I want to target any of them in. And that's why I said there's really not a lot that you can love about this game. A guy like Jace Peterson is a left-handed bat you might want to look at. If you want to go the Przinsky route, that's up to you. I don't play with that fire anymore. But that's really it. That's why I said, even though it's a game in Coors Field, these Atlanta bats don't really jump out at you. So don't be in a hurry to force them into your lineup. Remember, they only scored 2 runs last night in what people thought was a good matchup for them too. So a bad team in Coors Field is still a bad team. Just keep that in mind. Next guy we want to talk about is Jared Cozart going up against Cincinnati. Right-handed bats are hitting 274 with 20 earned runs and 28 innings pitched against him so far this year. So if anyone's going to do damage, it's going to be the right-handed bats. And the one right-handed bat we like on Cincinnati is Todd Frazier. 283 batting average, 16 home runs this year. He's kind of cooled off and he's in a bad park, so he's not a great option at third base, but he will be a guy that you can look for in your tournaments because you know a lot of people are going to be going after that Josh Donaldson ring. So if you come down to Frazier, you're saving yourself a couple bucks and getting a guy who has that same home run upside. Like I said, he has cooled off a little bit, but I mean, this is a guy who was on fire, one of the best third basemen in the league to start the season. So he's definitely somebody that's in play. See, moving on from there, you got a guy like Chris Tillman. Tillman is going up against the Washington Nationals. Right-handed batters are hitting 306 against him with 8 home runs and a whip of 1.65. So you really want to look at the right-handed bats going up against Tillman. Tillman is a right-hander, though, so the biggest bat against right-handed pitching on the Nationals is obviously Bryce Harper. The problem I have with Harper right now is Harper has been getting walked. He has 7 walks in his last 5 games because people just aren't pitching to him. There's nobody in that Washington order that really provides good protection for him. So as long as he's getting pitched around, he's not going to get you that big score that you're looking for. Could he be a safe guy for cash games? I don't even know if I'd go that far because if he gets walked 2 or 3 times and makes an out, I mean, he winds up with maybe 2.75 FanDuel points or, 3 points over on Fantasy Aces, maybe 6 points, 8 points, 9 points on DraftKings. I mean, for a guy that you have to pay $6K for almost on DraftKings or $5K on FanDuel, almost $6,000 over on Aces, that's just not enough of a return to justify using him. If you thought that he was in a good matchup where they would pitch to him and he'd get a couple home runs, then yeah, maybe you can use him. But it's just so much easier. He's getting a Barry Bonds treatment right now. It's just so much easier to pitch around him and get the other guys in that lineup out that, that's basically what teams have decided to do. The one guy who I think might be a little bit sneaky, though, guy with a little bit of home run power against Tillman, is Ian Desmond. Ian Desmond is minimum priced over on FanDuel. Now, he's been dropped down in the order. He hasn't had a great year, but the one thing that Desmond does have is a little bit of power. There's not a lot of shortstops in good matchups today, so if you go down and take a guy like Desmond at 2,200 and he does get you that home run in a tournament, you're going to probably be well ahead of everybody else who decided to pay up at shortstop because they couldn't find any cheap options at the bottom. Tillman's a guy who does give up home runs to right-handed bats, and Desmond is one of the best against right-handed bats that Washington has. So even if he's hitting in the 6 or 7 hole, which will only keep his ownership down, he could be a sneaky play for you in tournaments today. But I would definitely stay away in cash because he's just as likely to go, 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Wandy Rodriguez. In his last 4 games, 19 innings pitched, he's given up 10 walks, 4 home runs, and 17 earned runs. Now, you want to attack Wandy with right-handed bats. The only problem is we don't really love any of the right-handed bats on San Diego against left-handed pitching. Derek Norris is probably the one guy who really stands out as somebody that you want to use a right-handed bat against a left-handed pitcher. But as you go down, I mean, Kemp has been slumping. Upton's a guy whose numbers actually look better against right-handed pitching than left-handed pitching. And there's really nobody else in that San Diego order that stands out. So while I don't expect Wandy Rodriguez to pitch a good game, I really don't know who to take on San Diego against them. There's nobody that's really jumping out at me and saying this is a guy you need to use in your cash games and somebody who should be on your GPP radar. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Erasmo Ramirez. Ramirez is pitching for Tampa Bay. He's actually been pretty decent this year. Normally, he struggles against left-handed bats. In the last 2 years, he's given up a 280 batting average or better to left-handed bats. But this year, he's held them to 183. The numbers seem to point out that there is some regression coming. So that's just something to be aware of. The 2 left-handed bats, though, that Houston has, really the only 2 left-handed bats Houston has, are Jose Valbuena and Preston Tucker. Valbuena is a guy who does have the high home run upside. He has 14 already this year against right-handed pitching. But again, he has a really bad batting average. If you can find him cheap at a tough-to-fill position, he could be an option that you might want to use for a tournament. He'll probably be low-owned, and he does have the home run upside. But again, he's another guy that could go 0 for 4 very easily with a bunch of strikeouts. Preston Tucker, though, is an intriguing option. 278, 5 home runs, and 115 at-bats against right-handed pitching. And lately, he's been the left-handed bat that splits Altuve on the top and Correa in the 3-hole. So when you have a guy like that in front of you and another guy like that behind you, it's a pretty good matchup for him. So I think that Tucker could be one of those guys that could be sneaky. His price is very cheap all over the place. Definitely if you're playing in the qualifier over on Aces today, he could be a good guy to take a flyer on. But other than that, I really don't see too much with that game. Now, there's a couple more games we got to get into. It's a large slate today. Mike Bolsinger for the Dodgers going up against Milwaukee. He's a guy who's allowed left-handed bats to hit 301 against him. So when we're looking at Milwaukee now, the left-handed bats that stand out, Gerardo Parra leading off on top of that order. I mean, this guy's been as good as advertised over the past couple games. You know, if you had him and played him all last week, you probably had a pretty profitable week. He has a 314 batting average against right-handed pitching with 7 home runs and a ton of doubles. So this guy's been putting the ball in the gap. He's been giving it a ride. He's seeing it well. He's hitting it well. It'll be interesting to see what Milwaukee does now that Chris Davis is back, because now you have Davis, Parra, Gomez, and Braun in a pretty crowded outfield. And the way Parra has played so far this season, I think he's earned the right to get some more playing time. So he is going to be the guy who's probably leading off for them again today against the right-hander. The other guy again that we like, the other left-hander that we like against right-handed pitching is Adam Lind. Lind has a little bit more home run power. He's also hitting 309, so it's not like he, he's a slouch. He has 15 home runs so far this year against right-handed pitching. So both of those guys are in play. I don't think you're going to get Scooter Gennett batting up on top of the order today because they do have a pretty healthy roster. If you have guys like Braun and Gomez back in there and Lucroy, they're going to be in that 2 or 3 hole rather than moving up a guy like Scooter. So I don't think you're going to get him up there, even though his left-handed bat is in a good matchup today. He'll probably be hitting like maybe 6th or 7th in that order. So if you did want to take him, he should be very low owned. And anytime he's going up against a righty, it's always a good matchup for him. Let's see. Did we talk Mike Leake? Mike Leake is the next guy to talk about. He's allowed a 278 batting average with 10 home runs and 57 innings pitched to left-handed bats, which is tough for him because there's a lot of pretty solid left-handed bats now up on top of that Marlins order. You got D. Gordon leading off, who's a 328 batting average, 24 stolen bases. He picked up 3 more stolen bases last night, so I definitely think if he gets on base today, he's obviously going to be somebody who they're giving a green light to run, and somebody who you got to consider for your rosters, especially over on DraftKings. If he can get you 2 hits and 2 stolen bases and score 2 runs, that's 20 DraftKings points. That's a great return. You know, you're not even going to get that from most of your, power hitters. And like we said, anytime Gordon's on, he's going to run. So I think you might even have a better opportunity to get it with Gordon's legs than you will with some of these power hitters and their bats. Another guy I really like today is Justin Bour. Bour's been a right-handed power guy. The left-handed power guy against right-handed pitching for the Marlins. He has a 271 batting average with 10 home runs and only 140 at-bats. Those are elite power numbers that he's been putting up. A home run every 14 at-bats, that's something that's pretty good. Plus, he's batting 4th in that lineup and is really cheap all over the place. I think he's about 27 or 2,900 on FanDuel. He's only 4,300 on Aces, which is a steal. I didn't look at DraftKings today, but I'm imagining he's below 3,500 over there as well. And if you remember the other night, he was one of the guys with the top home run prop. So I think he could be a guy who has one of the lower home run props on the day-to-day. And definitely think that power is something you can't ignore for that cheap. If you're going to take a cheap option today, you want someone with upside, and the chances for him to hit a home run are a lot better than the chances of some of these other cheap guys to get multiple hits and really rack up the points for you. So he's a salary-saving option I definitely think most people should look at. I also like Christian Yelich and Derek Dietrich. Dietrich is incredibly cheap if you're looking for a punt option, and he's a left-handed bat that hits well against right-handed pitching. I think a sneaky stack tonight is going to be stacking up this Marlins team. You can get guys like Hechavarria and Morse and Mike Morse, who will probably round out the top 6 with the ones that we mentioned for pretty cheap. So it won't cost a lot of money to put him in there. And Mike Leake is a guy who is prone to some blowups, does give up a lot of home runs, and does allow a high average to left-handed bats, which the Marlins are going to throw a lot of left-handers at him. So I think this could be one of the sneaky places today. Definitely only for a tournament, but I do like guys like Bour and D. Gordon even for your cash games. Shelby Miller going up against the Rockies today. Again, I mean, the game's in Coors Field. Miller has been pretty solid this year, so there's nobody who really jumps out at you. He struggled most with left-handed bats, but even then, it's only about a 260 batting average he's allowed. If I was going to use anybody in this game for Colorado, it would probably be a guy like Charlie Blackmon. Blackmon has a 307 batting average, 10 home runs, and 19 stolen bases this year. So there's a lot of ways that he can score, and his price is a little bit cheaper than some of the guys like Arenado and Tulo, who are in a tougher matchup because Shelby Miller is pretty tough on right-handers. Miller does tend to keep the ball down and keep it in the ballpark, so I don't see a ton of runs coming from this Colorado team today. And I think if people are going out there and stacking this Colorado-Atlanta game expecting a big run total, they're going to be disappointed by the end of the day. I think that this is going to be one of the lower scoring Coors games that we've seen in a while. Jimmy Nelson is the next guy I want to talk about. You can take left-handed bats against Nelson. He's given up a 304 average to them with 7 home runs and 39 innings pitched. Goes up against the Dodgers today, so you got a lot of left-handed bats to choose from. Gonzalez, 296 average with 16 home runs and 243 at-bats. He's hit 4 home runs in his last 7 games as well, so he's seeing the ball well and is probably the hottest of all those left-handed bats on the Dodgers. So he would be the top option, probably the guy I'd put on the top of the list. You also have a guy like Jock Peterson. I don't really like using this guy in anything but a tournament because he does have that home run upside, but he's also a guy who's been putting up a ton of 0 for 3s and 0 for 4s and, just really, really not making value for you. The 0 for 3 game with a walk and getting you 2 points on DraftKings, and that's killer. Even though his price has come down, it's still been a killer lately. Until he gets a little bit more consistent and is a better hitter, yes, he does have the home run power. He does have the home run upside, and it is a good home run matchup. But that's why I said it's basically something you can only do in a tournament because there's no safety to it for a cash game play. I just can't use this guy in cash. I know the other night everybody was talking about he was going to be 60% owned and you had to use him. I still couldn't use him that night. I just don't think he's somebody that makes a lot of sense to be in your cash games. He's too much of a feast or famine kind of guy. 2 other left-handed bats you can look at. If you're looking for a catcher, Yasmani Grandal should be hitting 5th, left-handed bat with a good matchup today. 276 batting average, 14 home runs, and 180 at-bats so far this year. Also, Andre Ethier, 281 average with 10 home runs and 203 at-bats. So all those Dodger guys are in play. They're all guys that you should look at, and they're all guys who I think are in a pretty good spot today. We're getting down towards the end. We don't have too many more pitchers to go. Ian Kennedy is another guy, right-handed bat, 296. Right-handed batters have been hitting 296 with 9 home runs and 37 innings pitched against them this year. Left-handed batters also have 9 home runs and 43 innings pitched. So the one thing he has been struggling with is giving up home runs. This year, he's actually been tougher on left-handed bats than right-handed bats, but that's not usually the way it goes for his career. So the left-handed bats are probably the way you want to look against him. You got guys like Sin-Soo Choo, Mitch Moreland, and Prince Fielder. They're all in play, left-handed bats with a little bit of home run power. I don't really love Kennedy today, but I also don't know if Texas is going to really light him up. I think they will have a good game. I think you'll get a couple runs out of them, but I don't see Texas as being a team that's going to be the highest scoring on the day today. Kennedy has been a little better. He hasn't been good enough for me to consider using him, but I think he moves up from the target against category to the guys that I'm not targeting against, but I'm also not really going to use. Next guy is Hector Santiago. Hector Santiago is not somebody I'm looking to use a lot of bats against, but there is one guy that stands out to me. Santiago has basically allowed like a 230 batting average to right-handed bats, which is his, the better split against him. Lefties haven't been able to touch him at all. He's been really, really good this year. The one hole in his game is he's allowed 12 home runs in 68 innings, to right-handed batters. So if you have a right-handed power bat going up against him, it's definitely someone you should look at. On Seattle, there's one guy who fits that bill, and that's Nelson Cruz. Has a 390 batting average with 7 home runs and 59 at-bats against left-handed pitching so far this year. So with the way Santiago gives up home runs and with the way that Nelson Cruz hits him against lefties, he's probably going to be one of the lowest home run props on the day and definitely should be somebody that you consider. His price is pretty reasonable. I was just looking at FanDuel before I came on, and he's only $3,300 on FanDuel today. So that's a very reasonable price for a guy that has home run upside, and he's definitely somebody that you should be looking to get into your rosters tonight. Colin McHugh is the last guy I'm going to mention. Right-handed bats have been hitting 297 against him this year with 8 home runs and 59 innings pitched. That really leaves like 2 guys that are right-handed that I think match up well against him. Logan Forsythe and Joey Butler, who should both be up on top of the order. I also really like the catcher, John Jaso. Jaso is back. He's a guy who hits pretty well against right-handed pitching. Even though McHugh's splits don't skew that way, they're skewed more towards being kind of like reverse splits this year. I still like Jaso. He's been hot. He came in. His price is still pretty cheap. And how many catchers do you get that are leading off and on top of an order? So he's definitely somebody who I think you can put in play today. That pretty much sums it up for the pitchers I'm going to be targeting against. You'll notice there are guys that I didn't mention. Guys like Clay Buchholz I'm not going to be targeting against. He's been a stud in his last 3 starts. Guy like Mike Montgomery hasn't been touched basically since he's come up to the majors. In about 44 innings pitched, his numbers are absolutely phenomenal. I think his ERA is below 1.5. His WHIP is below 0.9. He's not a high strikeout guy, which is the drawback to him, but I definitely think that he's another guy I don't want to be messing with taking bats against. Irving Santana threw a gem in his first start, so he's got me a little hesitant using guys against him. You got Michael Pineda today going up against Boston. I know he's been feast or famine, but when he's on and he's good, I mean, those bats can't touch him. So, he's another guy I'm going to be staying away from. Noah Syndergaard staying away from. Gio Gonzalez staying away from. Danny Salazar. You got Garrett Cole. You got Lance Lynn. You got Cole Hamels. You got Madison Bumgarner. So those are the guys that fell in the category of guys that I'm not targeting against. I'm going to be interested to see what Josh says in his pitching section on which guys to use tonight, because I do think there are a lot of guys in pretty decent spots, but I also think that the price on a lot of these guys is elevated. So I'm interested to see who he says stands out. But that basically wraps it up for another episode of Benny's Bats here at rotocurve.com. Be sure to get over and follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at BennyR11 or RotoCurve over at RotoCurve on Twitter. Make sure you come over to the site, rotocurve.com, sign up for an account, start earning your curve points. All participation will help you earn curve points. And the more curve points you earn, the more merchandise, the more swag, the more extra money on these sites that you'll be able to get and redeem those points for. So thank you guys again for joining us. And as always, stay classy, DFS.